we can be on time. I will do the honors of sort of introducing Ben, although we don't generally do introductions in DSM, but Ben is going to be a second-year student in our PhD program here at Penn, and I will let him take it away. And then Ben, you have what's left of an hour, and you can tell us, how you would like that hour to go and what success looks like for you today.
Perfect. So in what's left of the hour, I will present our paper called Using Machine Learning to Measure Personal Qualities in College Applications. At this time, we are very, very close to submission. Basically, I'm just finishing up all of the formatting details so that we can get this submitted. But of course, any and all feedback is welcome.
You should say where it's being submitted, because for this group that matters, for all graduate students.
We're submitting this to Science Advances. And soon we'll see why, or what's part of the reason why we're going to that outlet. So that's success, hopefully getting an interesting conversation about feedback and next steps. And I will ask you to please interrupt, because I'm only using a single screen, so I can't really monitor the chat. So that said, we can get started. So sorry for my cough, just got over COVID. The first thought or idea is that personal qualities are obviously very important. They're predictive of many important outcomes in life, but they're really hard to measure, especially when we think about measuring them in terms of scalability, thinking about how costly it can be, and also in high stake settings. Right? So if we think of a context such as college application, if we give people items such as this, are you a hard worker? It's very likely that people who want to get admitted into a doctoral program, such as myself, they would say, I strongly agree, right? Because they want to self-present in a positive light. So in this research, the thing we set out to do is try to use machine learning to assess personal qualities in the context of college admissions. So what's the starting point? How are college admissions done now? They are done through a process called holistic review. And the whole idea behind holistic review is that we shouldn't simply look at an applicant's SAT scores and GPAs and simply have a cutoff, and whoever, let's say we admit the top 10% of applicants, or we admit whoever gets certain scores on their SATs. The idea is that students should be evaluated in broader terms. So what is their personality? What are their personal qualities? What are their non-cognitive skills? What else can they bring to the table other than their academic credentials? So the way this is done is that admissions officers will look at the whole of the applicant and the whole of the applicant's file and try to get to know this person through their essay, through their extracurricular activities, through their teacher recommendations and counselor ratings, and try to form a holistic judgment about this applicant and decide whether or not we offer this applicant admission or not. The problem with this process as it is now is that it has three main limitations. The first is that it's very, very time consuming. Over the past years, the amount of applications that a given school might receive has grown very, very much because more and more people are applying for college. And more people are applying for a bigger number of colleges. So big universities can receive all the way to 100,000 applications for big public universities, for example, in the University of California system. And of course, they don't have unlimited time, budget, and manpower to process all of these applications. So can we use artificial intelligence to hopefully scale up this process of holistic review? The second problem with holistic review is that it's hard to audit it for bias. It's not very transparent. There is not a lot of, or at least not that we know of, of published rubrics and systematic sort of ways in which this information is evaluated. So in this lack of transparency, it's really hard to audit this system for bias or prejudice. And an interesting sort of side note with this is that the original intent behind holistic review, behind back in the 1920s, when colleges started looking at things other than academic credentials, was exclusionary. So back in the 1920s, prestigious universities decided to look at personal essays and other sources of information to actually exclude participants rather than to include them. And in as much as the system was not systematized, it wasn't possible to audit it for bias. That's a second limitation of the holistic review process. And the third one is lack of reliability. Wherever there's human judgment, there can be lack of reliability between different raters. And even within the same rater at different time points, there's plenty of research that shows that, for example, judges are more lenient right after a break. And in the academic setting, for example, that on sunny days, admissions officers tend to underweight academic credentials and overweight them as comparatively in cloudier days, for example. So this lack of reliability can also be addressed by an algorithm, which always gives the same output given the same input. So the starting point to this research is the idea that text might provide a window into the applicant's soul. And there's a bunch of research looking at text and the way people write and inferring their personality from how they write and what they write. However, prior work on the college application, this is not the Common App, this is a typo, but on college applications suggests that what and how students write is not a window into their soul, but rather a window into their social class. So this was a recent article published in Science Advances, and this is why we're also going to this journal, that basically they use topic modeling and Luke software to assess the style in which students write and the topics about which they write. And they found that this was strongly related to household income. So one sort of worry that could arise at this time with our project is, well, if you use any kind of AI to try to understand personal qualities from student writing, you're only going to get information on their social class, because according to this research, these texts encode social class. However, one difference in our approach and this past research is that we're using a human-centered AI approach, where we are trying to balance predictive accuracy with other concerns such as fairness, transparency, or interpretability. And our goal is to put humans rather than algorithms in the center of this decision-making process. So by having humans, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but by having humans code these essays and humans read part of these essays, we're trying to put the human supervision back into this process and not just try to explain as much variance from this text as possible. So here's what we did. On the left of this diagram, we have the BERT model, which is the language representation model that we use that has been pre-trained by Google. And that was our input, right? So what Google did a couple of years ago is that they assembled a really large corpus of text and they pre-trained language representation model, right? So this is a very big neural network that represents language. The way this was trained is by masked language modeling. So this means the computer gets fed all of this big amounts of text with a bunch of the words missing. Say 15% of the words are missing, and the model learns to predict what's this missing word. And the other task it was pre-trained with was next sentence prediction, which basically means that it gets some text and it then gets 2 sentences. And the model has to learn to figure out which of the 2 sentences is the one that follows. So by doing this pre-training, we get a big neural net that will do these 2 tasks. And if we just look at the state this neural network is in right before it makes this prediction, we have a vector of 784 different numbers, right? So if you think about a single line with positive language and negative language, we have a 1-dimensional vector that can represent language. If we do that in 784 dimensional space, we have 784 numbers that can represent whatever that text means. And the crucial point is that after doing all of this very expensive and very technical and very difficult to do pre-training, BERT was made open source, was made available for researchers, and then we could use this model. So this is all of what Google did, and here on the right is us. What we did was that we looked at what applicants wrote in the 2008-2009 college application cycle as 150-word responses to this prompt. Please briefly elaborate on one of your extracurricular activities or work experiences. So we have a bunch of these short essays about extracurriculars. We then developed criteria for identifying 7 different qualities. And human raters use this criteria to code about 3,000 of these applications. We use this human annotated data set of 3,000 essays with annotations for the personal qualities to fine-tune this BERT algorithm. So all this means is that we take the final layers of all this hard work that Google did, and we adjust these weights so that we can optimally predict whether or not each of these 7 codes is present or absent in the text. So once we have this model, this fine-tuned BERT model that was fine-tuned on these 3,000 applicants, we can now use that to generate personal quality scores in the rest of the data that wasn't coded by humans. So we then get personal quality scores for the rest of the essays of the applicant pool. So in a matter of minutes, we generate scores for over 300,000 applicants. So we wanted to use this to see if we could use this to measure personal qualities from applicants' text in college admissions. So we're now going to look at the results of us trying to evaluate this model, did this work? So the first thing I want to show is inter-rater reliability, and this just means pairs of humans reading the same essay, how much do they agree with each other? So there's no algorithm, no machine learning here yet. This is just for a subset of around 200 essays that were coded by two coders, how much do they agree with each other? And we see that there is okay inter-rater reliability for some of the personal qualities, but some of the other personal qualities were a little harder to code. So for example, our raters had a little more trouble agreeing on whether a particular essay evidenced goal pursuit or not. And this
is it 0, 1, or is it a 1 to 5 scale on which they're rating?
This was originally done as trichotomous coding, so it was 0, 1, and 2. And then, because we found better results binarizing the codes, we binarized it. So 0 stayed at 0, and 1 and 2 just became 1. So we used binary codes for this.
Good.
So we will see that this original sort of inter-rater reliability will cascade down as we look at this down the waterfall, if we put it this way. So this is convergent validity, and here we see that we're able to measure personal qualities accurately, meaning we are able to match what the human rater said with the algorithm, right? So this is for the subset of 3,000 essays, which we have what did the human say, and after being trained, what did the computer say? All of these are out of sample predictions. So these are predictions made on data that the model wasn't trained on, and that's very important to reduce the possibility of overfitting. And here we see that for some of the codes, we have really good accuracy. For some others, we have okay accuracy. And this, if we sort of do the animation here, sort of matches the inter-rater reliability. So if the humans are able to code this texts accurately, then the computer model will be able to pick up on what the humans are doing and will be able to converge to those human ratings. So that's a first point. We're able to match these human ratings. We're able to measure personal qualities using this model. A second important point is that the model is equally accurate across subgroups. So this plot here shows different demographic characteristics. Here are, for example, English language learners and English native speakers, female and male applicants, applicants with parents who are married or not married, applicants who have parents with two parents with college degrees, just one parent with college degrees, or no parents with college degrees. Here we have data for race and ethnicity and Title I public school. So across all of these demographic characteristics, for most of the cases, we find that the overall accuracy, which is this red line, is overlapping with the particular accuracy for each smaller subgroup. And we actually conducted tests comparing the accuracy against each of these, against the majority group. And once we account for multiple comparisons, pretty much most of the accuracies are equal across the two subgroups. So this is really important because in terms of—
I have to interrupt here. So, I mean, I think sometimes FDR correction is done to obscure things that actually do look different. And I worry about that a little bit here. I think people will be very sensitive to possible racial biases, especially like with Black kids here. So when the Black group is above the line for teamwork, is that an overestimate or an underestimate, or what does that look like?
So, for example, if we look at this Black kids and teamwork, right? This would mean that the model is more accurate at finding teamwork.
Well, they can't be really
Black
accurate,
kids.
right? It's an agreement, right? There's
Yes.
not a ground truth.
If we consider what the human rater said to be ground truth, the correlation between the human and the computer is higher for Black kids and teamwork compared to the overall.
Mhm.
So it's
But
higher.
are the averages lower or higher?
We're going to look at the averages in just the next slide, right? So a way to think about this is sort of moderation effects for model accuracy, right? This is not looking at does the model predict higher or lower scores?
I understand that, but I think when somebody's reading this and looking for racial bias, that's the thing they're going to want to know first, right? So when you see a difference there, I don't, that would be my prediction for like how this paper will land.
Yeah, so we're gonna look at that just now, right? So the point here is that mostly when we look at the accuracy of the model, meaning how well does the computer algorithm match the human raters, for the most part, the accuracy across different subgroups is similar, meaning the convergent validity is similar across subgroups. We also have evidence for discriminant validity, meaning that the correlations between the codes are much smaller than the correlations of the codes with themselves, right? So here we have, for example, the correlation between the computer measure leadership with the human ratings of social purpose, and that is 0, right? So all of these off diagonals are the correlations between human and computer for different personal qualities. And we see that these correlations are smaller, much smaller. So this is what Dr. Mackey was hoping to see, right? Are there differences in how the model predicts, for example, teamwork in Black kids versus white kids or Latinx kids? So here we have the intersection of each of the 7 personal qualities and each of the different demographics characteristics that we have. And these are Ds, right? So these are Cohen's Ds, meaning how different are, for example, the scores for Black kids versus the score for all of the non-Black kids for pro-social purpose. And we see that for the most part, all of the personal quality scores that we generate are mostly independent from demographic characteristics. Most of these points are very close to the vertical line, which is 0. Whether we look at them in the green, which is the human ratings, or the red, which is the computer ratings in the development sample, or the blue, which is the bigger sample, right? The sample that for which we don't have annotated data. One exception to this is female and pro-social purpose, where we find that female applicants are much more likely to be coded by the humans, by the algorithm, and by the algorithm in the unseen data as being more, as showing more pro-social purpose, which is a gender difference that has been shown before. But other than this, most of these relationships of the personal qualities themselves with demographics are very, very close to 0. Meaning
And why don't you pause there and see whether Allison or anyone else would agree with that statement, right? Because
What
things
about
aren't
the-
exactly on the line.
Right. I
less-
mean, so I
Less
think that because,
perseverance for Blacks.
right. And well, I mean, I think what is interesting, what people have argued about AI before, right, is that algorithms drift further towards racial bias. Right. So if you look at, if I'm reading this right, the human raters are looking maybe slightly biased against Black kids. This is the green dot for teamwork.
yes. For example, if you look at here.
But then if you look at the red dot, you start to see that drift. I think that, no, so for teamwork, you see the same thing for perseverance, I guess, as well.
Mhm.
And so I think what you just want to be careful about is to say, oh, don't worry about it. It's it overlaps with the line, when people will look for the places where it doesn't, especially for the places where there's a whole literature on where bias can crop up.
Yeah.
But
And-
looking
and-
at this, sort of building on Allison, it's what you're seeing is that the computer is not more biased than the people, but it's unclear whether the people are accurate or are biased.
Well, but
It-
the direction is like further and not closer to the line.
Right, but they don't look any further to me. They look to me like they're equally biased. And again, whether it's accurate or inaccurate is unclear to me. But the computer looks to me like it agrees with the humans fairly well, and the humans show differences by race, which may be good or may be bad or whatever. That's a harder issue to address. I guess when
Yes.
asked statistically, are the computer farther away than the humans?
It's just hard to see, right?
Yeah, fair enough.
Mhm.
And I just think when you do this many tests, I don't think you can save yourself with FDR correction, right? Like, I think it can go both ways. I think you have to at least comment on that literature and the concerns that are going to arise from it about how this could be used or misused.
Mhm. Yeah.
I don't disagree. I want to make sure I understand the term bias as you're using it, Allison. So are you saying that like any demographic differences are biased because the assumption is that all demographic groups should be equivalent across personal qualities?
I guess what I know of the literature is based on like one psychology colloquium from last year, which is that a lot of AI predictions end up with consequences that are worse for Black individuals. And so what I was looking for was, he showed in the, a few slides ago that the agreement between human raters and the algorithm was worse for for teamwork for Black kids.
It's actually higher.
Oh, it's higher.
It's better.
It's better.
Yeah,
Okay, then I
the
have
conversion
wrong.
ability is better for teamwork. I'm not saying it's better for
I have the direction
everything.
wrong.
And in
I
So
mean, I think it could be that these things exist and then maybe are really coachable, right? That you can help kids write their essays in a way that highlight their teamwork. It's better. Okay, so it's better for perseverance too.
for example, if we look at, so if we look at teamwork and perseverance, right? These are higher for Black kids, meaning that the model is more accurate. It's matching the human ratings better.
Can that emerge from there just being more zeros?
We haven't looked at that. It shouldn't
I don't
be.
think we're emphasizing that it's better either, right? We're not saying like, wow, it's so much better, but the point estimates are not worse.
Right.
Directionally, they're better. I think we're mostly saying that there do not seem to be striking differences across subgroups.
And then when we look at the model scores themselves, rather than the accuracy of the model, but rather the scores that the model gives to Black kids in perseverance, it's actually a little bit lower, right? And the thing Lyle was saying is that it is lower, but it's not different from what the humans say. So if we take what the humans' ratings are saying as ground truth, then we say, we can be confident say that the algorithm is not introducing bias that wasn't there from the human raters, right? And we have reason to believe that the human raters are hopefully less biased than other ways of doing this, because the raters are reading the essays blind to personal characteristics of the students, right? So the human raters just read essays that said, I played football in high school and I was a team captain and so on. But the human raters don't know anything about these demographic characteristics.
Which is no
Did you
guarantee
test
that
that?
they're not biased.
Did you test that they don't know anything?
They didn't see at least.
So
right?
if they were like, if an essay used African-American vernacular, for example.
Yeah,
Or names of their friends.
yeah,
So
exactly.
I would be really careful about that unless they were like artificially created, because I think people can infer things about groups.
Yeah, no, definitely, right? But they were, at least they didn't know. They were blind to.
Yeah, again, with Allison, I'd be super careful about not overstating things like accurate or blind or whatever. Your claim is mostly that you're able to replicate the humans really well. And I don't think you have any strong evidence about the quality of the humans.
Exactly.
Nor do you need to.
Right.
But
I think
be
Ben,
careful.
there's
Yeah.
you don't have to read the chat. You shouldn't read the chat while you're presenting, but I think Lyle, did you want to make your point about the term accuracy in this context?
Yeah, I think accuracy is extremely misleading because computer scientists tend to view, and you've been talking that way, as if the human raters are the truth and accuracy is approximating the truth of the humans. Whereas other people will say the truth is reality. How good a team player is this person? And the humans are inaccurate already. So under your definition of accuracy, humans are perfectly accurate in the ratings, whereas under most definitions, the humans are imperfect. So I just be super careful about terminology. When you use words like accurate, it's ambiguous as to whether it's accurate to reality, which is unmeasurable, or accurate toward humans, which is measurable. And even then, is it the average of humans? Is it, what measure of humans is it for the raters?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and
Yeah.
that gets at the question, a question that I really wanted to ask is that, as I think about this, like if I'm a rater, or if I'm a admissions person and I read a essay and maybe your algorithm scores my essay and is different from what I thought, I'm trying to figure out like how I would then use that information. Like, would it be like, should I reread it? Or should I be like, well, this algorithm is capturing people and all their biases as they read it, which may or may not be better than my take on it. So I'm trying to figure out like, because I don't want to get too into the weeds of like, should you use the term accuracy or not? But I'm also just like unclear is if it's any better than an individual's choice on how to interpret something.
Yeah, so if I understand the question correctly, right? It's like if you were to see a score and read the essay and disagree, what would you do with that information, right? So that goes a little further down the line of us when we try to think about like how might an algorithm such as this be used in real life.
Sure.
Multiple ways in which we could think about this, right? Like perhaps if you are an admissions office and you find such a situation, then you meet with the other admissions officers and you discuss this case and you try to reach consensus as to was the algorithm wrong? Was this a false positive or a false negative? Or was my particular judgment affected by whatever reason? And then if you, as a admissions office, say you realize this was like a miscoded data point in your training data, right? Or I mean, a misgenerated prediction, then you can use these sort of like fixed.
And I'm fascinated by what you learned here.
It's being recorded.
Great.
Hey, Ben.
So then you could use that new sort of label that you just did with the admissions office and feed that back to the algorithm, right? So like you retrain after you accumulate, say, a new batch of or a whole new batch of, say, new or fixed predictions of things that you didn't agree with the algorithm. You can feed that back into the training of the model.
Okay. Thanks, Ben.
Hey, Ben, are you all able to hear me? This is Louis Hickman. I dialed in today.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hey, so I just wanted to share just from research in this area, knowing how, for example, education, Purple, other folks have automatic scoring for the GRE and SAT writing portion. Often what they're doing is having one human score the essay and the automatic system score the essay. Come in to adjudicate the difference and basically figure out what the truth is. And back to that discussion of truth, which is a very important one, right? The ground truth being used. It's what is interesting about what an algorithm does versus humans is if then we're applying it to 300,000 or 3 million, 30 million essays, right? Kind of as you pointed out, you can now audit it for bias, but also it's now treating every single essay the same, right? No longer is it going to judge an essay different based on whether it was before or after lunch. You're not going to have two different readers, one of whom's biased against men, one of whom's biased against women, one of whom's biased against blacks, and so on. Now you have the algorithm treating everybody based on the content of their essay, never having that information about demography. That does not mean that it will not be biased or unfair against one or more groups, but it does mean that in some ways it is much more standardized than humans, which is one of the keys for avoiding bias. So I think a lot of the ground truth, important to note and caveat in presentations, it's probably a bit clearer in the paper for people what that accuracy score means.
Am I correct in, that's great. That's very helpful. Am I correct in understanding though, this could be then a fantastic tool to correct for individual biases that differ from mean level population bias, but might also then encode mean level population bias into the decisions that are made?
Yeah, so
Okay.
if we think about both bias and noise, right, systematic and unsystematic error, it's very easy to see how this is good for noise, right? Especially if you have multiple readers code the essays. If
Yes.
if it's non-systematic error and you have 10 raters read each essay and you take the average of the 10, or you feed the 10 examples to the training, right? If 5 of them overshot it and 5 of them undershot it, on average, they'll be spot on. So unsystematic error can be sort of averaged out, and noise is very easy to see how it sort of dissolves sort of out, right? The issue with bias is much, much harder, and systematic error is much, much harder, especially as this like very productive discussion we've been having is that like, sure, we're saying that the human raters are ground truth, but of course they might be mistaken, right? Of course, they even disagree with themselves, right? So just looking at the inter-rater reliability, we know that these human ratings are not perfect. The problem then is, how can we really get ground truth in reality, right? So that's the harder question. And sure, it's nice to see that the scores we find, the scores we generate are mostly unrelated to demographics and mostly equally, let's say, accurate across subgroups. But of course, that doesn't take into account what if the original ratings by the humans are biased in some way. So far we've shown that the model can reproduce the human ratings. We have shown that the model reproduces human ratings sort of equally well across subgroups. We have shown that the model scores are mostly independent for demographics. Of course, there are demographic differences, but there are small and not a lot of them. And now finally, we're showing that there is some evidence of predictive validity, right? That these scores, when we look at whether they predict college graduation 6 years later, we find that they do, right? So model 1 is just the personal qualities, and they're all positively predictive of graduation, even though the effect sizes are very small. And in the second model, we now control for a rich set of covariates, including parental education, ethnicity, and a bunch of other demographics. And now 4 of the 7 personal qualities are predictive of graduation. One critic might say, looking at these results, these effect sizes are very, very small. And the answer to that is, yes, they are. We're predicting a consequential life outcome 6 years into the future. And of course, these codes are going to be less predictive than, say, demographic characteristics or SES or SAT scores. We're not surprised that what a student wrote about their extracurriculars in 5 minutes in 2008 will be very, very strongly predictive of graduation 6 years later. However, we take this to mean that there is some signal in these codes that we at least seem to be capturing some variation in personal qualities. Of course, people finish or drop out from college for multiple reasons, not just because they were good at teamwork or perseverance. So our contributions is that we try to use machine learning to measure personal qualities in a high stakes context. And as far as we know, this is the first time that this has been done. There's other uses of machine learning to, say, approximate personality from social media or from other kinds of text. This is the first time that it's tried to be done in a high stakes context. We find that we measure personal qualities in the college application context and we match whatever humans say. We show that, contrary to past research, essays can reveal personal qualities other than social class, or at least orthogonal to social class. And there is modest predictive validity of these codes. Of course, we have limitations. The first of which is that we didn't have access to the longer personal essays that students write because of reasons related to personally identifiable information and anonymity. So we can only use these shorter essays about extracurricular activities. The only source of predictive validity, or the only way in which we could evaluate predictive validity, was through college graduation, which of course is an important outcome, but it's not the only one that matters. And of course, it's not the only one that should be at least most aligned with measuring personal qualities. And of course, as we saw from the beginning, the inter-rater reliability sort of cascades down such that the codes with the highest inter-rater reliabilities were the ones that were also more accurately detected by the model, and were also the ones that were more predictive of graduation. And also related to what we've been saying, of course, the raters themselves, we take them to be ground truth, but of course, there could be all sorts of issues with these human ratings. So if we were to think about applying this, or sort of how could this be implemented, there are two things or two reasons for caution. The first of which is Campbell's law. Campbell's law states that the more a social indicator is used for consequential decision-making, the higher the pressures that this indicator will be corrupted. And thus, this indicator will be useless. So we can imagine that if people start finding out that these essays are being used in this way to generate scores, then you could see perhaps someone training a similar kind of model where you can type an essay online and get scores and try to tweak your essay to get the better scores. And the bigger problem with this is that we expect that different people with different access to resources will be differentially effective at gaming the system. So while we find that these codes are predictive and modestly predictive now, we don't know that this will remain so at equilibrium if we start using these in the real world. And the second complication of sort of trying to implement this is algorithm aversion, which is the tendency of people to trust human decision makers more than algorithms, even in the face of contradicting evidence. So even if there was ways in which we could use this, and we could perhaps show that these algorithms are less biased than human decision makers and are less noisy than human decision makers, and we can still always have a human in the loop that will sort of work with these predictions, the tendency for algorithm aversion suggests that it might be difficult to try to implement this. And of course, we're not suggesting that this gets implemented now, but it's rather a demonstration of a way of measuring, of trying to assess personal qualities in this context. So if we try to zoom out and think of other ways in which AI can be used in psychological science, this is what we have sort of done now, right? Used AI or machine learning as a measurement strategy. And the main thing we show is that it produces measurement that's scalable, right? Rather than having humans code 300,000 essays, they can code 3,000 essays, and we can generate sort of similar predictions at scale. Other things where this sort of approach can provide useful ideas, or at least can show potential that hasn't been very well studied, is measurement in high stakes settings. And we sort of try to approach this now, but of course, this wasn't the main focus of the paper. Also, historical data, if we wanted to track psychological characteristics over time, we cannot ask people who died 100 years ago to answer questionnaires, but perhaps we can try to infer psychological characteristics from old text. And one thing that I'm thinking about that perhaps we could use AI to overcome biases and questionnaire responding, such as reference bias. Another way in which AI and machine learning can be used is as the modeling strategy. So for example, rather than use regression, which will fit a line or a plane to data, we could use other kinds of machine learning models to try to generate more flexible models. It could also be the stimuli shown to participants or the subject matter being studied. So say we used AI to generate chatbots or AI generated images, and these are the stimuli we're using in our experiments. And also as a mechanism for generating hypotheses. And I think the past DSM talk on flow and information theory sort of highlights this idea, right? How can AI and machine learning be a way to generate hypotheses? So thank you. These are all pictures of robots writing essays and then graduating. And all of these pictures were drawn by neural network. So I just thought that was cute.
Thank you so much, Ben. Much needed applause. I think there's a question about the which words are driving the predictions. And I know this approach is not exactly the same as some other approaches. So I wondered if you could elaborate on that. And while you do, could you also show table 1 or 2 from the paper that shows the coding rubric that gives, I think, a much more visceral sense of what these personal qualities are?
Perfect. Yeah. So these are the the coding rubric for the 7 personal qualities, and we have fictionalized text on the right. And while you all can take a look at that, I will say that we haven't really looked at, say, word counts in the essays that were that were scored higher versus lower. But surely we can expect that, for example, words such as help and helping and so on are likely to be predictive of prosocial purpose and so on. But one of the advantages of this sort of approach is that it's not relying on word counts, but rather on sort of like a hidden representation of the meaning of the text. And relying on word counts can have problems in that if I say I wasn't the team captain, the word team captain will be there, right? So if I say I wasn't team captain and I was team captain for a bag of words approach, it will be the same.
But nonetheless, I mean, first of all, people mostly don't say what they didn't do in their essays.
Yeah, of course.
Secondly, even though you're using a modern deep learning method, one can still ask the statistical question, which words are driving it. So there's a bunch of algorithms out there, you probably know, that will take any model you've trained or fine-tuned and reverse back out to ask what are the most influential words. Sure, it ignores the fancier things you're capturing about other pieces there, but it's still usually at least somewhat informative, and you should see words like help showing up. And occasionally it pops out other words that are sort of weird or words that might concern people or whatever. So it's a standard sort of debugging tool.
Yeah, we should definitely
give some insight.
Yeah, we should do that. Ben, do we know how to do that, or do we need Lyle to chat us something?
I'd love to see a link. The way I could do it is basically look at the highest 10% and lowest 10%. And
I would run someone else's standard code like Captum. So their code base is out there. So email me.
Perfect. I will. I think that would be very, very useful.
And Allison, you said something in the chat about, would you mind elaborating on that so I don't multitask?
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering about the framing of this, if you could point to any examples where machine scoring of essays has made things better in some way. I just don't know that literature at all. I just saw it in the news that Philly was going to do this, which made me think Philly is not the first district to do it. And so I'm sort of imagining the discussion of your paper, like I already made the point about just sort of alluding to work on racial bias, but I also think broadening out other ways in which machine scoring has been used in education successfully could be nice to add.
By the way, I think Philadelphia changed again, and I think Philadelphia just announced that they're not going to use essays.
It was really controversial, right? And so I don't know, but maybe no one else has done it for exactly the anti-algorithm bias that you described, but I thought maybe it had been done.
I think a lot of school districts and ETS have done it, but I don't know the current literature. But I think I like your meta point, which is there's a bunch of literature out there on automatic scoring of essays and how it's good and how it's bad, and that might be relevant.
I don't know. We looked and maybe we're looking in the wrong places. Ben, we didn't find a lot on automatic scoring.
At least not in
Of
terms of
essays.
quality. Like there's scoring of essays in terms of like writing quality.
Mhm.
And like, say, if I give you an essay as a writing task and I want to evaluate your writing, I think that's well evidenced. I don't think there's.
Well, could you say something about that in terms of like the long-term effects of going to that kind of system? Right. So it's not exactly what you're doing, but it's
Mhm.
sort of this broader point of should we trust algorithms? Right.
Yeah. So and there is like examples of things that have been discontinued. So for example, the computer science department at UT Austin used an admissions tool, for example, for a while. And it was really interesting to read about its failure, right? Because it was very heavily criticized and trying to like understand.
Can you say more, Ben? I think admissions tool is not a sufficient description of what they did for us to appreciate this fascinating vignette.
So what they did basically is they had a system that would look at application materials for graduate students and spit out percentage recommendation for admission. And it had a lot of, you could say, positive traits. For example, it gave the reasons why. It was an explainable system. So it gave out the reasons why it was recommending someone or not. But there were like really important limitations. Perhaps the biggest one was that it was sort of done in secret and nobody knew that was being done until somehow people found out, and it was they tweeted about it and they had to like cancel it immediately because of like backlash on Twitter.
But it was about the opinion about the algorithm and not the successes or failures, or like the people who got in that shouldn't have, or the opposite of that.
The main reason was the main criticism was it's been trained on prior admissions in, officers like the prior judgments of admissions officers, and in computer science we think these are usually biased against women and against minorities, so it's encoding this bias. But it's not like there was like a very careful audit, right? I think an interesting phenomenon is that what algorithms do is that they are auditable and therefore you can show they're biased, as opposed to having a room of people that will sit and talk and come to a conclusion that is not sort of quantitative and therefore cannot really be audited very, very carefully. So in a way, it's like algorithms allow you to turn on the light and see that things might be faulty or biased, whereas the status quo sometimes means that the lights are off and you can't really tell or like very precisely measure these biases.
Ben, the lights are going to go off on this meeting in a few minutes, and you have two questions. Jared raised his hand first and Jacob next. See if you can do it before turn off the lights.
And feel free to skip my question because it builds on the comments that I was saying before. But I remember when I was a Mapster and Duckworth taught me saying that all studies are shit, and this is why we do more than one of them. And I'm wondering if there is actually like another way, and it might be a shitty way, but another way that we could get the actual truth. Like, could we select 250 people randomly from the 200,000 or whatever in your sample, and then like go out and like have them like peers assess them on different levels, but some way of like being like, okay, well, this isn't just the average bias of the average rater, but it is getting close to what we could call truth. Has people done that? Is that a feasible thing to do?
Yeah, so that's really really interesting and would be great, right? Rather than having humans read the essays and try to decide, like go find these people and like have them do tasks and find their friends and family and have them, and then you can get like a very, very much richer sort of ground truth, right? And you take the average of all of these
Or at
things,
least another one.
better. Yeah. But it's much harder to do. Right? Like,
Sure.
but yeah, definitely like the more we can improve the ground truth we're using, the training data we're using to train the algorithm, the better, right? And it's very easy to improve the quality of the training data in terms of noise, of unsystematic error. It's much harder to debias that, right? Because
Ben, why
if-
don't you take one last question from
Yeah.
Jacob in 3 minutes?
yeah, go Jacob.
Sure. This is super cool. I think it's super promising that they're roughly the computer's roughly as reliable as humans. Are they reliable on the same questions as humans are reliable on? Like, are the ones that people disagree heavily on the same ones that the computer gets wrong?
Yeah. So we can see this here, right? So this is inter-rater reliability, how well the humans agree with the other humans that read the same essay.
Mhm.
And here is convergent validity. How well did the human ratings match the computer generated likelihoods? And like the correlation between these two vectors of 7 numbers is like 0.90 or something.
Okay.
So it's really high correlation, meaning that when the humans had trouble coding it, of course, the computer had trouble matching.
For the whole category or for the individual, like, are there certain essays where like everyone gets everything wrong and there's certain questions where they get 100%? Or is it the fact that like across the, the ones that the computer disagrees with the humans with are different than the ones that the humans disagree with each other on?
I'm not sure I understand the question. You mean like different prompts?
Yeah, so there's question, because there's a case that there might be ones that are easy to code and hard to code. And I'm curious if what's easy to code for the computer is, the same, as easy as for the humans.
Well, at least in terms of the personal qualities, right? It matches, meaning the personal qualities that the humans find easy to code, or at least that the humans agree with each other, are the ones that the computer is more accurate with. In terms of the prompts, it's all the same prompt. It's every student answered the same question, which is, please elaborate on one of your extracurricular activities or work experiences. And we haven't looked at like, say, if we try to identify what are they writing about? Are they writing about work or extracurriculars? And is there some way in which what they write about moderates the accuracy? We haven't really looked at that. Is that what you mean?
I'm talking about like intra-sam, if you give a
I think he's saying, let me clarify, and then we have to wrap up, says
Yeah.
Manti. I think you're saying that are there certain essays that everybody finds it difficult to code, human beings or the computer model? And I don't think we can, I think it's an interesting question, but like, I don't think we have the answer for that.
Okay.
But it's a good question. If I understood it correctly. They're all on this anyway. So or maybe I'm misunderstanding, but let me like end here because Ben, I think what you're doing is great, and I think you have found a direction, generally speaking, in terms of like really hard quantitative analytic-y sort of things as you enter your second year of graduate school. So I'll save the chat, and I also want to thank everyone. If you have another project in mind that you're like, I now know Ben a little bit better as a PhD student, and I think he might be interested in this, then I'll let you email him directly. But for now, I will ask everyone to unmute and give Ben a round of applause. It was a great presentation. Yay, good job,
Great
Ben.
job.
Awesome.
Good job,
really
Ben.
good,
It's great work.
And thank you for all of your questions and comments.
Really nice.
All right, see everybody soon.
Bye.
Bye.